Greetings, everyone, and welcome to arc.dev's Remote Career Success Week, where we're learning how to land your dream job for those who've done it. I'm going to be your host today, Brandon Spooner, the creative producer for Be Spoonified and a friend of arc.dev, where we're connecting software developers everywhere with great remote opportunities. Thank you all for tuning in with us for the last 2 days. We're truly excited about all the content that we're going to be able to bring to you to the stage. We have had a great amount of responses from all the attendees. And we are so excited for this next conversation because a lot of the chats you guys have been alluding to is pretty much like how to land your dream job. And we have the perfect person to answer those questions. Matt Nearents is here, the senior product designer at GitLab. GitLab is a complete DevOps platform delivered as a single application, fundamentally changing the way development, security, and ops teams collaborate and build software. Matthew joins us about his career path that eventually led him to land his first remote job. Matt, thank you so much for joining us today. We're super excited, as I said earlier, to kind of dive into this conversation. And typically introductions, how we do for speakers, we have this long bio that we read, but this time, because it's a job seeking event, we want to start with one of those familiar job interview questions that you always see. People always ask you, can you tell me about yourself? But let's try it, and we're going to take a spin on it and see if we can do it within maybe your own 30-second elevator pitch and go from there.
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, so my name's Matt Nearents. I'm a senior product designer at GitLab. I am responsible for designing tools within GitLab that allow designers to collaborate and hand off designs with developers. Before that, I had sort of a broad array of experience from doing consumer websites and mobile apps at an agency to more enterprise experience at IBM and another startup in the DevOps space that was building tools for developers in the machine learning space. So yeah, that's my 30-second elevator pitch.
Great job. Awesome. So we got to know who you are, right? And so we have the 30-second elevator pitch. Now we want to, understand how did you get there? So the next question that we have for you is, why did you decide to pursue a remote product design career?
Yeah, so I pursued this job last year before the quarantine. And I just remember driving home from work one day. I had, an hour and a half long commute. And I called my wife and I was just frustrated and angry and almost in tears with how angry I was about how I felt like I had no control over my life. Like I was leaving in the morning, getting home at night, only spending maybe an hour a day with my kids. And the worst thing is when you're in the office, you have downtime where you're just twiddling your thumbs or playing ping pong and you can't, be with your family or be with your friends during those times because you're stuck in an office. Plus the commute. And I just feel like there are companies that, they take so much of your time. Your job takes up so much of your time. And there's companies that just don't respect that fact. So I was very just frustrated with that and felt like I had no autonomy or control. And that's kind of what got me thinking about it.
So I guess, a lot of people nowadays with the pandemic, that's apparent, they're taking that pivot, right? And it's great to know it's that, for you, it was more, not so much of economy happening and change within the pandemic, but it's more so of the quality time and the values of you wanting to spend more time with your family and wanting to find that balance between work and life. And specifically, with a lot of the tech companies, they're commuting 1 or 2 hours from their house on a bus with Wi-Fi, so you can still communicate with your colleagues. But a lot of times people are missing out on those small moments. So, for you, was there anything that, happened, or was there maybe a moment where you woke up, on the bus or that you can recall or want to revisit that you were like, okay, at this point, I got to shift and start to pivot, into another direction?
Yeah, so I kind of have a funny story, and it's what kind of was the catalyst for me applying to GitLab in the first place. Is I started this job at a startup. They had reached out to me asking me to apply, and I did. And I got the position as a senior product designer there. And a few months into that job, I scheduled some vacation. It was 3 weeks. I got it approved in writing a month in advance, went through all the procedures to get that approved, wouldn't have taken it if people had a problem with it. And, you know, my work was under control, so I felt like it wasn't going to disrupt anything. I get a call week 2 from the CEO chewing me out why I was taking this much vacation.
Right.
And even though I told him my manager approved it in writing, he still made me cut my vacation short and come back into the office. And at that point, combined with, you know, that call I had made to my wife before, just not feeling autonomy, that was really the point where I was like, I either need to work for myself or I need to be remote, because this is not an acceptable lifestyle.
Yeah. And it's great you point that out, because now, you know, I was reading a blog post, and I was looking, and they had really specific points about creating a healthy enterprise environmental factors for yourself, and that, you know, includes like your organizational culture, or, you know, the climate, the structure. And so what you're calling out is pretty much saying like, hey, you want to find a place and that promotes all of those healthy environments for you as an individual. And then pretty much now remote working led to that point where you're saying, I feel comfortable because now I can balance it all. And not only do I have a healthy culture, but I also have a healthy environment at home that promotes productivity for my job.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely a lot more productivity and just that feeling of autonomy, feeling like you have control over your life. My social life is better. Every aspect of my life improved when I started working at GitLab. So I'm super grateful that I was able to get on there.
Awesome. And so we have that moment where you're like, all right, enough is enough. I'm out. And now we're in the process of landing that next job for you, right? That next remote opportunity. So maybe dive in a little bit. How did you find your current job opportunity, and describe what that application process was like?
Yeah, so I had always been like a hobbyist when it comes to design and even some development. And doing that, I kind of developed an interest in DevOps tools, whether it be things like Firebase or Heroku or Revenue Cat, just things that made my life easier as a developer, because I'm not a very good developer. And so I got kind of passionate about that. And I ended up was applying for jobs, and I had 2 offers, one that paid more and one that paid less. And I ended up taking the one that paid less because it was in the DevOps space. And I thought that would get me the experience to eventually go where I needed to go. And I think that's probably one of the biggest reasons why I was able to get the job at GitLab, is because I had that experience. And the way I found that job was, you know, the whole vacation fiasco happened at that job. And so that made me start searching. And the way that I sort of went about it was I reached out to a UX manager first. I usually do that. Like, I don't just submit an application. I usually try to find out more about the position, more about the team, what they're looking for, try to get on the good side of the hiring manager so that when I submit my application, they recognize the name. I've talked to that person. So I reached out to her, and then after that submitted an application. And I think it was mid-October when I had my first call. And then over the next 2 months, I had 3 or 4 other calls. And those calls ranged from product designers, product managers, and then like director of UX, 3 separate interviews. And that was over a 2-month period. And then, so between October and then the offer was made mid-November.
Oh, wow.
So I guess that's a month. So it was about a month and a half of interviewing and back and forth.
So it sounds like you went through about 4 to 5 rounds, maybe 3 rounds, I think you said earlier, of interviews. Was there any specific prep that you did on your own to kind of prepare you for each phase of the job application process?
So I guess for prep, I interview a lot. Like, it's almost a hobby for me to just go. I don't do it so much anymore because I have zero interest in leaving my position. But at past companies, I would interview just to interview and just to get that practice. So that was kind of a prep for me. But specifically for GitLab, their handbook is completely public and online. So I sort of went through their values and what they look for in people and culture. And I usually do that anyway to tailor my cover letters and things to the company. So that was, that was really the only prep, other than I would say reaching out to the UX manager would have been a form of prep, because I would have used the information she gave me to, tailor which position I was applying to or how I wrote my cover letter, etc. So that's kind of how I approached it.
Wow. And so now, and it's interesting too, is to understand, because I believe that this first opportunity that you had with GitLab is your first remote one. And, the word on the street, as my old folks would say back in New Orleans, is that, we heard that it's pretty rare sometimes with companies that have been very remote for a while to open up their doors. And so can you maybe explain or walk through the process of, or maybe show us of how you were able to utilize the skills that you had to sell yourself in a way where they felt confident that you would be able to conquer the remote opportunities, or and then maybe also to, because a lot of people are looking at how to get hired for the first time for remote opportunities, maybe share some tips that you were able to find or some resources you were able to find to help you in that success.
Yeah, so I think, as far as remote competency goes, it's like they want remote experience, but you can't get a remote job unless you have remote experience. So if you don't have that experience, it can be hard. But there are other ways, I think, that you can show that you are remotely competent. And one of those ways, like I mentioned earlier, is I've always been a hobbyist. For the past 10 years, I've never not had a side project, whether it's trying to build a startup, which honestly, I'm not a serious entrepreneur, but I just, for fun, building an app with some friends, or designing a portfolio website, or designing a website for a local company. You name it, I've done it. Literally nonstop for the past 10 years. And I think the fact that I could show that, outside of my 9 to 5 and outside of my family, I was still able to set aside time where I could focus and not be distracted and find some success with these projects. That shows that, I could work remote in some capacity, because I can balance my personal life with my hobby projects, with also my 9 to 5. I had a little office space I could work in. I had ways to stay focused on those things. And, when you can show that you've accomplished these things in your free time, aside from your job or your school, I think that speaks to your ability to work from home a little bit.
And now, is there any tools that you could maybe do a shout out for that were helpful in balancing kind of your management of the hobbies and your job and doing those projects in preparation?
I wouldn't say there were specific tools. You mean for like managing, like time management, or headphones, especially when you have kids? Put on the headphones. No, I think I wouldn't say there are specific tools, but I would say that there are specific like sacrifices that you have to make. Like, you can't watch and binge all the shows that you want to watch. You can't play all the video games you want to play. Yeah. If this is important to you, you have to sacrifice some of that free time. And so, I didn't use any time management tools or any organizational. I mean, I'm a big fan of Google Drive. So I'll say that is like, I do everything in Google Drive. Yeah. I keep all my cover letters in Google Drive, resumes, all that stuff. But yeah, as far as projects, I just, I find that I'll try to collaborate with people and they're just not willing to give up the TV, the video games, and the things they do in their free time to get anything done on the side. And, you're not gonna, differentiate yourself if you can't do that.
Right. And it's good to bring it up too, is that, talking to the point of, you said you were applying for jobs frequently before you were at GitLab. And then you mentioned just now, you're like, hey, I got a lot of cover letters and resume versions probably there, because on the path of success, there was probably some bumps along the road. And when you're looking at being faced with plenty of rejection in job search, as all of us are, especially now during this pandemic time where everybody's applying for the same role, what advice would you give someone who is struggling with job rejections right now?
Yeah. So just to quickly, the story behind that, 2 or 3 jobs ago, I hated my job, hated it with all the passion in my heart. I hated it, just hated the culture, everything about it. I desperately wanted to leave. And I was probably rejected from more than 20 different places that I had applied to. And some of these places got into like final round interviews. Like, you're putting a lot of effort, a lot of time, a lot of your heart into these interviews, getting into the final rounds. You're feeling great. The conversations are going great. I typically have positive experiences in interviews, whether I'm accepted or rejected. And so you feel great about all these interviews, and it's just rejection after rejection after rejection. It was unbelievably difficult mentally. What I would say, I mean, it maybe it's obvious, but you can't take it personally, right? These companies, interviewing is a skill. I've interviewed people before. I probably didn't, I probably would change the way I interviewed, knowing what I know now. And they have a lot of candidates to go through. And so you just can't take these things personally. And then the other one is, interviewing, I think, is a muscle. And if you don't train a muscle, the muscle weakens. And so
let me write that down, Matt. That's a great tweet. If you don't train a muscle weakens. Interviewing is a muscle.
Interviewing is totally a muscle, right? It's a skill. Like, you have to, I say some people have maybe more natural talent than others at it. But honestly, getting used to the questioning styles that people ask, getting used to being under pressure, that's a skill that you have to build. And that's why I say earlier, interviewing for me has always almost been a hobby, because it's a skill that I'm trying to build so that when that dream opportunity comes, I'm not scrambling to prepare, and I'm not really nervous because I have no idea what they're going to ask and I have no idea how I'm going to answer. By the time GitLab came around, I wasn't really even thinking about what kinds of questions they would ask me, because I had interviewed probably 40 or 50 times in the past 2 years. And so, yeah, it's definitely a muscle. And then the last advice, don't apply to jobs even if you think you're just below the qualification level. I remember applying for, this was 2 or 3 years ago, applying for like a lead UX. And when I say lead, I'm not talking about lead over a project. I mean like team lead. And I almost didn't apply. I'm like, this is ridiculous. I'm nowhere near ready for this. And I don't know how it happened, but I was made an offer. I ended up turning it down to take the lesser paying job in the Devops space that I talked about earlier. But I was just blown away that I was able to get an offer when I felt like I was not qualified at all. And I'm not saying if you're a junior designer to go after manager type roles, but if you're a junior designer and it's a senior role or it's a mid-level role, just apply. You never know.
Okay. You're like almost in the sense of just take the leap, because
take the leap.
It'll give you it'll be able to, for you to get a chance to exercise that muscle again, that interviewing muscle.
Yeah.
But also just, I think what, and one of the points I would really love to elaborate on with you right now is it's almost in the sense of saying, hey, like, keep going, because the rejections or the process, right, of continually applying, continually going, is actually training you to get that job that you want at the end. So without you trying, then you're never going to be able to push yourself in a way where now when you get to that point where you're like, all right, this is it, you will never know. So it's great to hear that motivation, right, to kind of keep pushing in. And actually, I'm going to transition real quick because Alicia Alexander has a question over here. She said is applicable to what we're talking about now, and I don't want to lose the momentum and steam on that. Her comment is saying, I noticed a trend in job postings requiring UX designers roles to know JavaScript. So I was just curious on what is the implementation expectation?
Oh, I love those job posts. It's funny because I would approach at a few companies ago, I would approach our HR being like, what are you asking people? This makes no sense. We don't do this. We don't need to do this. Why are you asking for this? I would say just the amount I use JavaScript it's zero. I don't use JavaScript. It's definitely helpful to know, like if you're examining something a developer built and you want to get in there into the browser dev tools and you want to tweak things, knowing things like HTML and CSS and JavaScript can be helpful. But I've never been at a job where it's required to know. And so those are things like in the interview, I would clarify with the interviewer, why do I need to know this? How are you using it? How often do you use it? And you may truly find that it's a role that it's like, oh, you're a hybrid front end developer and designer. But at that point, it's probably not the position you want unless that's your goal. So I'm also of the belief that I don't take positions just because I was given an offer or because I'm desperate to leave somewhere. I want to work somewhere that I believe in the position and the culture in the company. So I've turned down jobs because I didn't like the design tools they were using. So I just don't think JavaScript is a big need for designers, and that's probably just an HR thing that they put in there, not really knowing, what their team is actually doing.
And to your point too, Matt, you're saying, you turn down jobs that aren't, aren't aligned with where you were at and what you're looking for and what you see as yourself as a long-term goal. Is there any situation where that doesn't apply, or should we kind of always have that in the back of our minds, just to, put in the back burner?
I think it applies most of the time. The thing where I think it doesn't apply is if you're a student or you find yourself jobless because of whatever reason, the pandemic, your company folded, then it's like just get a job so that at least you're accruing experience. But if you have a job, and this is just my opinion, even if you hate that job, like I did, I was at a job for 2.5 years and I hated it for the last 1.5 years. I still would not be desperate to leave. And that job specifically where I hated it, that's the job where I interviewed probably 20 times. But after the first 12 or 13 interviews, I got an offer at a company and I ended up turning down that offer because I felt like it would have been a similar situation culture wise. And I didn't like the tools they were using, and it wouldn't have furthered my career. So my thought was, I'll be unhappy in both places, but if I move over there, that's going to stop me from being able to move again, because you can't just move every 2 weeks. You have to at least be somewhere for a few months at least, right? Like 3, 4, maybe 6 months. That's like the minimum. So just, if you have a job, stay there until you find something that will actually be better, and don't just leave just to leave.
Yeah, that's good tips, guys. So stay where you're at. Set yourself up. Really do your list of. I've always been taught, in my world, is write your pros and cons. And if you're going to a new one and you have more cons than where you're at, the next opportunity is waiting for you. Just hold out. And that's a good thing too, Matt, that you're kind of alluding to in this conversation. I want to try to maybe jump back a little bit because, I mentioned that you had been on interviews and you had made a comment earlier in this conversation about, how because you were on so many interviews, you now want, when you start to interview people and in your job where you are interviewing people, the opportunity to, what questions to ask. And it's kind of curtailed or a little bit or changed kind of that conversation that you have when you're looking for potential employees. So can you maybe just allude to some of your favorite interview questions, or even give us an example of a question that it's always asked and you're like, hey, that really doesn't apply. Maybe you should ask this instead, or, just what dialogue would you have with, that interviewee when you're in that moment? And maybe just kind of give us an example of some of your type of favorite interview questions that you like to get asked when you're in that process as well.
Yeah. So my favorite interview questions are actually the hard ones because they generate the most valuable conversation, I think, with the interviewer. And those questions would be like, tell me about a time when. So, for example, tell me about a time when you had a conflict with a coworker, or you disagreed with a coworker, or tell me about a time you got something wrong as a UX designer. What did you do to fix that? What did you learn from that situation?
Yeah.
Those are the types of questions that I'm most interested in because, as much as designers want to appear to be perfect and all-knowing and godlike, and I could save an entire company on my own. Products are made by teams, not individuals, and teams collaborate, and input comes from everywhere. And so designers have to be good at accepting input and resolving conflicts and working with people. And at GitLab, we call it having short toes, right? Your toes can't be stepped on because they're short. You're okay with feedback. You're okay with collaboration, and it doesn't matter where it's coming from. We're not elitists. We're not thinking, oh, you can't give feedback because you're a back-end developer. It's like, no, that feedback is valuable, and teams should collaborate the entire process. So, it's been a long time since I've interviewed somebody, but if I were interviewing, those are the types, tell me about a time when you had a conflict with a coworker. Tell me about a time when you disagreed with a decision or feedback from your team, stuff like that.
That's great. And that actually can kind of allude now to, our next thing of soft skills, right? So when we're going into the interview and going into the conversation, can you list maybe 3 to 4 key soft skills that helped you land the remote job, your remote product design job?
Yeah, sure. So I don't when I talk about skills, I don't want to feel like I'm like bragging about myself. So these are 3 skills that I came up with more in the vein of like, these would be important for remote, not necessarily that like I exemplify these perfectly, because I'm always trying to improve how I work and my soft skills. But to prep for a remote job, these are sort of 3 soft skills that I came up with that would be really important. The first one is to be communicative. And what I mean by that is to over communicate. There are no in-person meetings. You don't have the ability to walk up behind somebody and ask a question. And so what you really need to be okay with is asking questions publicly, even if, like in a public Slack channel that multiple people have access to. You have to be okay with that. Because you just don't have that in-person opportunity, and other people can benefit from the questions and answers that are asked. And so, at GitLab, we're actually encouraged not to communicate in private Slack channels as much as possible. It still happens, and it's okay. But the goal is that 80 to 90% of the conversation happens in public channels, so that it's documented, it's searchable, multiple people can benefit from that. And you know what? It's hard to, you feel like you're asking a dumb question, you feel stupid, but like you have to be over communicative. And over communicating things like when you're taking vacation and when you're not at your computer, and just so that your team they can just roll and you're not blocking anybody. Collaboration is another big one. I think that's not remote specific, but I think, collaboration is really important because, like I said, products are made by teams, not individuals. And you just have to be willing to collaborate. And I guess with the remote job, you have to be more proactive about it. You have to sometimes, like I said, you can't just walk over their desk. So you have to seek people out. You have to ping people. You have to pull people into conversations a lot more than in an office where you can just tap on somebody's shoulder and say, hey, take a look at this. And then the last one, that I think people don't talk about enough, but it's one of GitLab's values, is just kindness. When you're working remote, at some companies, you're going to be working with people from just a huge array of diversity and background in culture, in beliefs, and kindness is honestly probably one of the most important, one of the most important values that we try to adhere to. You're not going to agree with everything that everybody says, and some people are going to rub you wrong because you just have conflicts with them personality wise or whatever. Kindness can go a long way. So I think those three are really important.
And Matt, I love kind of what you mentioned in the communication soft skill that you mentioned first, right? The over communication, the idea that GitLab tells everybody, hey, put it in public so that we can all share and learn from those things together. So I know that sometimes, being in that setting, it can make somebody a little bit over anxious or kind of, lead to them kind of being a little closed off. So is there anything that GitLab or you from your experience have learned to kind of help soften that magnifying lens, as somebody would say, so that they feel more comfortable in sharing and moving forward with that communication aspect and skill?
Yeah, so I think there's later there was a question that I think you were going to ask about preparing for a remote job and what kinds of questions you'd want to ask a company. There are companies who I think have remote policies, and then there are companies who have remote cultures. And one of the things GitLab does really well is that they don't just have a remote policy. It's like the whole company revolves around the concept of being remote. And so these values that they communicate, like kindness and being over communicative, the leadership is doing it by example, is encouraging it. It's constantly reinforced. You're constantly reminded that it's okay to ask questions that you might not be comfortable asking. There will never be, retaliation or negative feedback from those things. It's so just entrenched in our culture that it was a really easy hurdle to overcome. And, for companies who maybe are new to remote because they were forced into it from the pandemic, might not be the case, right? So that might be something you want to find out when you're interviewing, is whether it's a remote policy or remote culture.
Got it.
Yeah.
And so we're kind of still on skills. And the next question that we have for you is, what's your number one non-obvious tip for remote product design job seekers?
Non-obvious tip. I honestly think we already talked about that. And I think it just goes back to doing side projects, doing hobby projects. That's my non-obvious tip. People may not be able to see, if I design an app or if I do a startup with some friends, how could that possibly benefit me in my career? But like I said before, it shows that you can get things done in your home despite whatever distractions you have around you. And when I talked earlier about, having to give up things like shows and video games, I didn't mean that like you have to give up everything, but being able to find that balance of giving up enough to get you that time to be able to actually get stuff done, but then, keeping enough of it that you don't go insane. And so I once heard, I was in a computer programming class and the teacher in college, and the teacher said, every good developer has a side project. They'll never finish it. It's just this thing that they have to do, and they're passionate about it, and they'll always work on it. And I've sort of taken that personally as a designer, I sort of lived by that, where I always have a side project. And I've actually found that in most of my interviews, they want to talk about those things more than they want to talk about my actual job experience. So for remote and non-remote, it's been like just a lifesaver for me.
Awesome. And we kind of alluded to it a little bit earlier in the conversation when we're talking about, interviews and the amount of cover letters and resume versions you have, and you reaching out to a UX designer on LinkedIn. Are there any other ways that job seekers now can optimize their CV while they're doing their remote job search outside of those skills, or any maybe tidbits? I know somebody mentioned earlier in the chat, of placing, if they're going for a remote job, placing their state or where they're from on their CV. Like, any tips that you can give to the attendees today would be great.
Yeah, so I guess I have two.
Mm-hmm.
One would be, one is pretty simple. I've seen a lot of resumes where it's just colors and weird illustrations, and they're doing like vector art of their face, and it's just, you just don't, just be yourself and don't use those templates that everybody is buying out there. Just be yourself, and it looks like you're trying too hard anyway. That's just my personal opinion.
Mm-hmm.
But the other one is the one that's, I think, more helpful, is look at people in your field that you think are doing well, and
Mm-hmm.
look at their LinkedIn. Look at the job, the career path that they've taken. Look at how long they've spent at each company. Look at how they describe themselves and how they describe the work they did, and learn from that. Right?
Mm-hmm.
That was sort of when I would look at prominent UX people in the field. That not only helped me get my LinkedIn and my the way I describe myself together, but
Mm-hmm.
it also helped me in my philosophy towards searching for jobs and how long I stay at each company. Because I noticed this trend where, you have this designer who's like, a really good designer at a really cool company that like lots of people would want to work at, and you look at their career path and it's like they got out of school, they spent 6 months here, 8 months there, 3 months there, 4 months there, and then 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost like you almost see this in every design. It's like a weird pattern that I was seeing. And so, whereas like my parents would have said, no, you get a job, you work there for 15 years, you move up the ladder, right? That's
Mm-hmm.
one way to work your career. The other way is use different positions to get the experience you need to learn things and then move on before you get stale. You not only learn more, but you get more diverse experience, and you probably get more pay raises than you would staying at a company for 15 years. Um, so I guess that's a little more than just like getting your CV together. But I think whether it's your CV or whether it's just your career in general, looking at people who are successful and looking at how they are doing it has been super helpful for me.
And it's interesting, Matt, in this conversation now. It's and I'm interpreting kind of this message of, with you having your hobbies, with you always seeking for that next job opportunity, versatility is actually welcome when it comes to employers looking for potential applicants and potential employees, because we're in the tech world right now, so things are constantly changing. So by you putting yourself in the forefront of change and being able to be adaptable, and also versatile, it actually makes you a stellar candidate for those folks that are looking to hire folks into their companies, right?
Yeah, for sure. Because you just never know what they're going to need on a given project, right? The company that I really disliked, I got a lot of e-commerce experience at that company, like designing e-commerce apps and websites. Well, it just happened to be that here at GitLab, I recently switched to a new project where that e-com experience is now totally relevant, right? So what got me the job was probably more my enterprise experience, building tools for developers at the previous company. But then within the company, that e-com experience all of a sudden became pretty relevant. And so, yeah, I think having diversity of experience is really helpful, whether it's getting a job or moving around within a company, but also just knowing what it is you want to do or what you want to get out of your career. Because you can be a UX designer for mobile apps for the rest of your life doing consumer type design, or you can move into enterprise doing educational software or software for developers that's a lot more complex. So how are you going to know what's going to make you happy unless you get a little bit of experience doing those things?
Yeah. There's so many gems. This chat's blowing up over here. I'm clicking on that and doing this because people are writing paragraphs because they're like, we want to know so much. So Matt, again, thank you for dropping so many gems and wisdoms.
Oh,
For sure. I know the next question we have on the list is, what role does your network play, and then how do you approach making new connections remotely?
So I think network can play a role. I have found the most success in actually networking with recruiters. I'll work with a recruiter, something might not work out. 2 years later, that same recruiter hits me up and I got an offer out of it. And he was he was super frustrated because I turned that down. And I know how much time he spent working with me and hoping that, because I had worked with him probably 2 or 3 times and finally got an offer. And I was like, I can't take that. And
Right.
he was just, whatever. But so I'll actually, any recruiter that wants to add me, even if I'm not interested in the position they're offering, I'll still add them because who knows, I want to keep those relationships good. I don't proactively network too much other than with coworkers at my current company. I think that's important. Sometimes you can feel vulnerable putting yourself, like requesting connections on LinkedIn. I just try to get over that. And, if I work with you at GitLab and I know you, I'm probably going to add you. And then sometimes I'll go out and add UX designers or UX principal or lead type people from prestigious companies, just so I can kind of follow what they're publishing. Because that's just helpful to sort of see, like maybe you're interested in writing blogs and that's how you want to sort of make a name for yourself. It's probably good to see what those people are doing. And, you don't want to write blogs just to write them. You want to be at the forefront of whatever you're writing. Right. You want to write things that are interesting. And so you kind of got to keep track of what people are doing. But other than that, I don't really network a ton.
Okay. And I know you mentioned blogs and adding folks. Is there any blogs right now that you've maybe read within the last 2 weeks that really called out to you, that you would want to drop that hint for, the audience here today?
I always pay attention to what Nielsen Norman and Jared Spool are writing. I do think that some of these more prestigious UX agencies have started getting a little bit more into just not as quality content, clickbait type, not as quality content, but they're still the leaders of the field. And those are the people that I would pay attention to. But other than that, I can't think of any right now.
Okay. So we're at the part now, guys, where we are going to jump into these questions, because I have a feeling that some of these questions are going to need some time. So I want to give it as much time as they need. But before we do that, Matt, I know that, one of the big things that we had mentioned in conversations is that, this was how to land your first remote job. And so it would be great if you, could walk maybe through us, for myself and the audience here, what that first 90 days looks like, you starting your first remote job, and maybe pointing out some of the advantages and sometimes challenges that you experienced within that time period.
Yeah, so it's a little overwhelming because you don't have the one-on-one personal in-person meetings. I don't know why it's so much harder to stay organized and to just really digest what people are saying when it's remote versus in person, but it just is. It's a psychological thing. Maybe it's just me. But I think that was hard. And just because of that, like GitLab's information is just in so many places. The handbook's online. It's thousands of pages long. You have to really get good at searching it and figuring out there's probably an answer to the question you're asking, and you need to probably go out and find that somewhere. And you get used to it though. I don't think it's that big of a deal. It's just, you're going to probably feel overwhelmed, and that's okay. And then the other thing was just figuring out your cadence and your work-life balance at home. So whether your situation is you live alone, whether you have roommates, pets, kids, whatever, figuring out when you're working, what's your routine. Not you might be tempted to get out of bed and just start working, right? Because your office is right there and you can get a lot done real fast and then be done. But, GitLab really encourages people to have a morning routine, get up, have breakfast, work out. Don't skip that just because you're working from home, because your quality of life and your stress levels your quality of life starts to go down, your stress levels start to go up, and you need routines, and you need boundaries for when you're working and when you're not. And you need to be able to battle, I'm working at home, but I don't want to be thinking about work when I'm not working, even though I'm still in my home where I work. So it's easy to start associating your home with work. And I don't really have an answer of how you battle that, but I think if you're just cognizant of it, it's like when I get off the computer, I don't have to think about work, right? The whole point is for me to not think about work. Otherwise, remote work isn't worth it. But I just find that over time, you just figure it out. And I think it's just good to be cognizant of those things.
And that's great too, because I know we had a conversation with Katie yesterday, and she really reiterated the point of creating creating great mental health habits for yourself, and then almost even operating as if you're going to a job when you're doing remote work, to keep that balance. So it's great that you, attested to that in this conversation. So Matt, thank you so much for all these tips and gems. I feel that I'm working my interview muscle now as well, interviewing you. But let's go ahead and jump to some of these questions since we have some time, and I really want to make sure that we are able to answer everything. Again, guys, please feel free to go ahead and tag Arc Team in there, tag Matt. We're going to be answering a good amount of questions today. We want to make sure we get everybody in questions answered, so feel free to add them as you can. We're going to scroll up a little bit. The first question, Matt, comes from Alicia again. She said, Matthew, I noticed that you said that you had previous development experience at GitLab. How is your workflow defined during developer handoff? Where do they draw the line and how you implement your designs? For example, as a designer, you stop at animations or a basic bootstrap carousel while the developers/engineers do the filter, sorting, and CRUD functionality.
Yeah, so where we draw the line is we don't do any development. All of my development experience comes from taking some classes in college. I did a minor or part of a minor in computer programming. I used that to do some apps that I was interested in building on the side, doing some websites. I enjoy that as a hobby. I don't do it as a career. And so when I hand off a design, I don't do any of the implementation. And that's honestly how I prefer it. Because I don't want to start designing things that are catered to my skills as a developer. I want to push cool designs and cool animations. And if I can't develop those, I'm not going to design them. So.
And the next one is actually a comment, which I'm going to follow up on the question. It's from Francis. She said, yes, I tend to get scared applying for a senior level since I don't have the required number of years as a senior. I always think it requires 10 plus years or more. So, and I know we had that conversation of, applying as a junior, applying for these senior level positions and things like that. So what would be a good kind of a year frame or an idea of like number of years that, hey, I'm a junior, I only have 2 years of experience. Should I take the stab at going for the senior level role, or maybe should I add 3 more? So, at least I'm coming at 50% of what they're asking for instead of 80.
Yeah, I think the definition of senior definitely differs between companies. And that's why I would just say, don't worry about it. Obviously, if you have 6 months of experience, you're probably not applying for a senior level role. But with 2 years of experience, there are some companies that would consider you a senior developer, and there are some companies that wouldn't. And in all honesty, in my experience from interviewing and also being an interviewer, it is so much more about the person and their personality and wanting to be a coworker of that person than it is about a number of years, right? And you'll find that some companies you will just hit it off, and some companies you will not. And I've had a lot of companies where they did not like me,
Yeah.
but like that one company, I definitely was a couple years under the requirement, and they just liked me, and it was, I don't know, it was irrational, but they made me an offer, and that's what matters.
And I think, again, to the point we were having, is just apply, take the leap, just try, because you never know. To your point, Matt. Gina has the next question here, and she starts it off with a statement. She says, really helpful advice around applying for positions for which you don't have all or almost all of the qualifications. How did you manage to interview for that lead position that you applied for and received an offer? And was it the case that the requirements were more of a wish list, or were the real gaps that you were able to address during the interview process?
Yeah, so it the requirements seems more of a wish list for sure. Like,
Okay.
I think they were just trying to filter candidates, which I obviously ignored. But the way I interview for things like that is I try to go into the interview with confidence. I am confident about my skills as a designer. I'm confident that I can speak to my experience, especially when I'm like in the middle of all these interviews and I'm working that muscle and it's strong and I'm comfortable and I'm in my element. Like, if you were to interview me now, I probably would interview pretty poorly. But when I'm in it, I'm confident, and you just have to, like, whatever that job requirement was, whether it's they want more experience than you have, or they want JavaScript and you're not sure why, just tune it out and just go in with confidence and speak with confidence, and, you know, have those values of kindness and collaboration, and you'll do fine. And if you find yourself like you're not confident, it might be because you just need more practice. Some people will take more practice interviewing, some people will take less. I think anybody can get to the point where they can go into an interview and be confident and speak confidently with enough practice, with enough interviews under their belt. They'll be fine. It's hard because it's a time investment and an
And I think,
emotional investment.
yeah, I mean, what you're telling me now, it sounds taxing for sure. And it's crazy too, is that, we talk about confidence and just having just the reassurance within your own skill and what you bring to the table. Because, Sharik, she actually asked a question, which I think you may have answered, but feel free to elaborate a little bit more if you would like to, is how do you handle the interview for the senior position for IEG, a senior backend developer, and you don't know some of the things which are mentioned in the job posting. And so confidence is one of the things that you had, but, are there any other tips like research or any other things that you maybe can think about doing that you've done to maybe help answer this question as well and prepare them for that interview?
Yeah, I mean, I think you mentioned it. So research is huge. If you see jobs are, just above, a little bit above where you think you are, go out and research the things that are in those posts, right? So one of the things you might see in a designer job post is like knowledge of design systems, which I did not have a lot of experience with design systems when I was applying for some of these jobs, but I started to learn about them, and I started to build my own on the side. And it was a very simple, crude design system. But then I could say, yeah, I got a little bit of design system experience. It might not be what their wish list is, like, oh, you have enterprise design system and you've doing it for years for companies, for real products, but you don't have to talk yourself down like that. You just say, yeah, I've got a little bit of design system experience. I'm still learning it. I'm really interested in it, stuff like that, because you're doing it on the side, and you're finding those things in the job descriptions that you lack, and you're going out and you're getting those things on the side as much as possible.
And Tina asked the next question, Matt, what are some key tips for keeping everyone on the same page, especially between dev dash product and design? For example, as a designer, how much free range do you have when a product manager writes a PRD and elaborates around the types of problems you're wanting to solve? Do they set limitations for things not to explore within the design, for example?
Yeah, so that's a good question. That's totally dependent on the company culture and how teams work together.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the things I'll say about GitLab is we have I actually just wrote a blog post about it, but all of our collaboration tools are inside of GitLab. So, we're not posting designs to InVision and posting links to Slack and using Trello and, using Google Docs and all this stuff to keep track of decision logs and things around designs. Everything happens within GitLab on GitLab issues, and everybody's in the same place. And so it's really easy for us to collaborate and work together. But if you're in a situation where you have too many top-down requirements, or you feel like people above you are micromanaging what you're designing, I think there's two ways you can go about that. One is to leave the company, because that's not a good design culture and it's not a good collaboration culture. Two is to be an evangelist for what's the right way to do things, and to start taking it upon yourself to be more than what your job description is, and start introducing your team to new tools and new ways of working, reading blogs and how teams work together successfully, and then saying, hey, we should try these things. And I've found a lot of times in my job, I would do things sort of outside of my job description, like trying to change company culture, by myself, because I didn't like it and I didn't like how the teams collaborated. And that sometimes worked, sometimes didn't. But even when it didn't, it gave me something to talk about in other interviews. And that's a hard question to answer specifically, because it depends on the company culture. But
yeah, and well, that answer I think is a great leeway into just having them get an understanding of where you're coming from. And I think that the question has a lot of deeper layers, that there's other factors that you have to kind of attribute into in that collaboration moment. But I think that the skeleton of the answer that you gave was great. I know that we're going to be jumping back a little bit, and Gina has a question, and it's going again around like resume and job posting and CVs. Is it a question related to responding to jobs with requirements above what you have in your resume? If one does submit a resume through an online system or ATS, will it automatically be rejected, even for smaller companies? Obviously, it's been best to submit directly to a hiring manager, but it may not always be possible. Maybe it's through a recruiter, or maybe they always require a person to submit via an online system / ATS.
Yeah, so ATS is kind of a black box to me. It's mysterious. I don't know how it works. I do know that it filters people out based on keywords. So the only thing I can say to ATS is, if you're required to do that, just make sure that you are keyword optimizing your resume. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is, you have to, like, some people, if you're like me, you're a little bit more of a down, like a realist. Like, I look at my past experience and I don't attribute more success than I deserve. I don't, I'm very like, this is how it was, and I don't embellish a lot. But you should be able to look at your past experience and tell convincing stories. And when I say embellish, I don't mean to lie at all, but I think you can talk about yourself in more positive light and use better words. And even if, you're like me, where you don't feel like, we go back to the design system example, like, I didn't feel like I actually had design system experience, but because I did it on the side, I know what they are, I know how they work, and I could contribute to one. And so there's no problem with me embellishing on and telling a story about that experience that would put that keyword in my resume so that I wouldn't be weeded out. And where you draw the line between telling a story and where it starts to become where you're embellishing too much and you're not, and your image of yourself, that's up to you. I never want to sell a false image of myself, but I also don't want to sell myself short. And I tend to do that, I think, more than other people. So don't sell yourself short, get your resume optimized and look at your experience. And there may be more there than what you actually think there is in that experience.
And guys, thank you so much. Just to reiterate, these sessions are going to be recorded, and you will have access to them post the event. Please feel free to visit our Facebook page that's pinned on the top for more information and when these great gems are going to be coming out. We have time for one more question. And Matt, thank you so much for sticking around with us and answering all these questions. The last question comes from Anita. Which tool, in your opinion, works best for the developer handoff? Is there any one tool that does everything? And GitLab has been a product for developers. So do you have any in-house tool for the same?
Yes. So that's we do have in-house tools. That's what I just wrote my a blog post here at GitLab. I published it through GitLab's website, and it's talking about why GitLab is the right collaboration tool for the entire team. That's literally the title, why GitLab is the right collaboration tool for the entire team. And so, like I illustrated earlier, I've been at a lot of companies where you're posting things to InVision, Trello, Slack, Google Docs, wikis, you're emailing things, you're having in-person meetings, and all feedback just some of it gets lost, and it's really hard to organize it and to respond to it. And to, I've had plenty of times where I've presented a design and it was missing something, and now I look like an idiot because it's like I just ignored the feedback. But in GitLab, there are things called issues, which are like tasks that developers create or designers create. And all it is a description of something that needs to be done. It's a feature, it's an enhancement to a feature, it could be an idea, but you create these issues. And then in GitLab, we have an InVision type tool where you can attach designs to that issue. And so because developers are so familiar with issues, we put our designs there, everything is cohesive and it all works together. And the point of the blog post I was making is that I really see this as the future of design, moving design into the DevOps lifecycle, not outside of it. Because when you're sending developers off to InVision and Zeppelin and all these different places, abstract, that's just a mess and it doesn't work. But if you're all working in the same tool at the same time, that's a beautiful thing. So yeah, we definitely use GitLab for everything.
And Matt, I know you said you made a blog post. Would you be ever so kind to share that in the chats with us today so we can check that out?
Yeah, sure.
Well,
I will post it.
Yes. Thank you again, Matt, for joining us today and giving us some great tips and for posting. It has been such a pleasure. Again, thank you for taking the time to chat with the community. And if people want to go ahead and reach out to you, what ways can they do that?
Yeah, I love talking about this stuff. So yeah, feel free to reach out. LinkedIn is great. I usually just connect with anyone on LinkedIn. So, and yeah, thanks for having me. It was super fun.